7 years, no steps, no words. Then one morning, a maid turned on a record player, and everything changed. They say there are moments in life that split time, before and after. For Charles Prescott, it happened on a Tuesday morning at 9:12 a.m. in the middle of an ordinary week. He was sitting in his home office overlooking the wooded back lawn of their property in Fairfield, Connecticut. Calls stacked up, emails unanswered, investors waiting, but he couldn't focus. He kept replaying the same footage on the security monitor, again and again. Not the footage from the garage cameras or the ones pointed at the front gates. No, he was watching the one from the living room. The footage was grainy, slightly tilted, and too far from the action. But there it was in the middle of the rug, his son standing. No one holding him, no one prompting him, no crutches, no harness. Just those thin legs that had never supported him for more than 3 seconds. Shaking, bending, then straightening. And then he took a step and another. Charles couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. He hadn't seen Nathan move like that ever. Where was the therapist? He muttered under his breath. Who told him to do that? That's dangerous. But there was no therapist in the frame. Only a woman in the far corner of the living room. A dark-skinned woman in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, wearing a head wrap, a faded t-shirt, and house shoes. She was dancing. Not performing, not choreographed, just moving to the music she had playing on the record player. A stack of old soul records she brought with her when she moved in a few weeks ago. She spun around, swayed, dipped low, and Nathan, just a few feet away, had watched her, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. And then he stood. Charles sat back in his chair, his voice barely above a whisper. How is this possible? That morning, everything changed in the Prescott house. But the change didn't begin in the footage. It didn't begin in the legs of a little boy who'd never known how to walk. It began days earlier with a silent child, a frustrated father, and a maid who never raised her voice. The boy, Ellis Prescott, had lived 7 years in silence. Not completely mute, no, but quiet in a way that unsettled adults and confused his peers. He never laughed, not loud anyway. He never screamed, even during physical therapy. He didn't cry when he fell out of his chair last summer and split his lip open. Instead, he stared, always watching, always listening, always still. Dozens of therapists tried to connect with him. Specialists came in with toy boxes, hand puppets, and brain scans. Nothing stuck. Charles wrote checks so large they didn't even bother to invoice him anymore. Still, the boy stayed in the chair. His mother, she hadn't been around in years. She left when Ellis was 2, unable to accept what the doctors had said. That her son would likely spend the rest of his life with limited mobility, no independent walking, and even less emotional expression. She left, and Charles buried himself in work until the work started to feel like noise, too. The only person who stayed was Elma, the housekeeper, but even she eventually said she was too old to keep up with everything. That's when she recommended someone. A woman she said was different. Not a nurse, not a nanny, just a woman who'd been through some things and knew how to keep a house in order. Her name's Monica Traylor, Alma had told him. She's not fancy, but she's got heart. Charles didn't care about heart. He needed someone who could follow rules, keep a schedule, keep the place clean, and not make things worse. Still, he nodded. A week later, Monica showed up with a suitcase full of second-hand clothes, a crate of vinyl records, and a photo of 2 boys in a plastic frame. Ellis didn't say a word to her when she arrived. She didn't say much either. Just looked at him, smiled gently, and said, "You don't have to talk to me, baby. I'll just talk to you." And she did. Every morning, every afternoon, and into the quiet of the evenings, Monica filled the air with her stories. Stories of Maud, Georgia, of raising 2 boys without a husband, of working double shifts at the diner, of scraping by, and of singing. Always singing. Not loud, not pushy, just there. Just consistent. Charles barely noticed until that morning when Ellis stood. But what Charles didn't know yet was that Ellis hadn't just stood because Monica danced. Something much deeper had happened in the days before. The first thing Monica noticed about Ellis wasn't his wheelchair. It was his eyes. She called them old man eyes. Not in a cruel way, but in the way Southern folks say when a child seems to carry something heavy before his time. There was something behind his stare. Not blank, not empty, just held back. Like he was waiting on the world to show him a reason to care. He watched everything, everyone. He noticed when Monica moved the cereal from the second shelf to the first. He noticed when she folded the towels differently from Elma. He noticed the way she hummed low while she cooked. He never said a word, but she saw it. His head would tilt ever so slightly when she walked by, always watching. It didn't bother Monica. In fact, it reminded her of her youngest son, Lennel. Lennel used to sit quiet just like that, she said one morning while cracking eggs into the skillet. Didn't speak till he was 4. Would just sit there with his big ears and wide eyes, taking it all in like he was grading the world. Ellis blinked but said nothing. She smiled to herself. Of course, once he started talking, he didn't stop. Used to wake up just to tell me dreams he had. One time he dreamt our dog robbed a bank with a popsicle stick. I told him, "Boy, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard." From the hallway, Ellis let out a small breath. It might have been a laugh. Maybe. Monica didn't push it. Instead, she kept talking to the boy like he talked back. She talked while she dusted, while she scrubbed the baseboards, while she ran her mop in long, slow swipes like she was painting the floor. She told him about the time Lennel tried to fry bacon with the iron, about the summer the AC broke and they slept with wet towels on their backs just to cool off, about her mama's peach cobbler and how she could never get it quite right. "You know what I learned?" she said one afternoon as she peeled sweet potatoes at the sink. "People act like talking is the same as connecting, but most times it ain't. Some folks talk just to fill up space." She looked over her shoulder toward the boy sitting in the entryway. "You listen. I can feel it." Ellis didn't look away, just nodded barely. Monica smiled, eyes misty. That nod meant more to her than any full sentence ever could. The days rolled by, slow but steady. Monica started putting on her music when she cleaned. Real records, scratched and worn. She'd bring out the old Crosley she kept in her room and let it play in the mornings. Sometimes Sam Cooke, sometimes Aretha, sometimes the staple singers. She didn't play them loud, just enough to hear the lyrics fill the room like warm butter. Ellis would sit by the door, not in the way, not asking for anything, just there, watching her move as she wiped windows, sang off-key, and danced around the coffee table with a rag in one hand. One day, she looked up and caught him tapping his fingers on the side of his chair, barely moving, but there it was, a beat. "Boy," she said, "you got rhythm in there, don't you?" He froze, looked up, eyes wide like he'd been caught stealing. She didn't laugh, didn't make a fuss, just said, "That's good, that's real good." The next day, she left the living room door open a little wider and turned the record up just a notch louder. And when she danced a little slower, like she was waiting for someone to follow her steps. He didn't, not yet, but he watched. Meanwhile, Charles barely noticed the shift happening in his home. He'd grown used to silence, trained himself to ignore the echoes of a house that had grown too large for its family. Monica was just background noise as far as he was concerned, a cheaper solution to a problem that didn't have one. "Is she doing what I asked?" he asked his assistant, Gina, one day over the phone. "She's on schedule. Meals are on time. House is spotless. And Ellis seems calmer." "Good. Keep her on for now." He didn't ask how she was doing it. He didn't care. But Ellis did, because every word, every story, every off-key note that floated from Monica's mouth planted something deep in the boy's chest. Not hope, not yet. Something quieter, familiarity. The feeling that someone saw him and wasn't afraid. But familiarity can turn into something else fast, especially when the right song hits at just the right moment. Monica Traylor didn't grow up planning to be anybody's housemaid. She wanted to be a schoolteacher, a first-grade teacher to be exact. "Kids that age still believe in magic," she once said, "and they still think grown folks know everything." But life didn't go as planned. Nothing ever did after the car accident. It was 2007. Her husband, Leonard, was driving her and the boys home from church on a rainy Sunday in Bibb County, Georgia. A delivery truck ran a red light at Pio Nono Avenue and crushed their old Honda Civic on the passenger side. Leonard died on impact. Monica woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed with a bruised rib, a dislocated shoulder, and a 4-year-old who wouldn't speak anymore. That 4-year-old was Lionel. Her other son, Kendrick, had been in the back seat and made it out without a scratch physically. Emotionally, though, was a different story. Monica had to rebuild her life from scratch. She moved in with her sister for a while and took jobs nobody else wanted. Dishwasher, motel laundry, even a part-time janitor at the courthouse. She never complained. But what she did do every single day without fail was talk to her boys. Even when Lionel didn't talk back. Even when Kendrick started skipping school and rolling his eyes at everything she said. She kept talking and singing and loving them loudly and patiently. "I know what silence feels like," she told Ellis one day while she dusted the banister. "But I also know silence ain't the end of the story. Not if somebody still talks to you like you're in the middle of it." So when Monica came to work at the Prescott estate, she didn't bring a degree. She didn't bring a polished resume or a certification in early childhood development. She brought what she knew, that even the quietest children are listening, that people heal when they feel seen, and that sometimes the most powerful medicine is consistency. Monica's first few days in Connecticut felt like being dropped on a different planet. Big white house, a gravel driveway longer than the street she grew up on, doors that opened with fingerprints, a fridge that talked. She'd walked through the kitchen her first night and whispered, "This place got more buttons than a space shuttle." Still, she never let it shake her. She found her rhythm quickly. 6:30 a.m. coffee, 7 a.m. breakfast prep, vacuum the east wing by 9 a.m., bedrooms by noon. Every day like clockwork. But what she paid most attention to was Ellis. She learned that he liked his eggs scrambled soft, not firm. That he preferred toast cut in triangles. That he never wore socks unless they were dark blue. That he hated overhead lights and preferred the curtains cracked open just enough to let in the sunlight. It wasn't coddling. It was noticing. And Ellis noticed her noticing. One night, she was cleaning up the kitchen when she felt a tap on her elbow. She turned around slowly. There he was, Ellis in his chair, holding something in his hand. A record. It was Otis Redding. She smiled and took it gently. "You want me to play this tomorrow?" Ellis gave the tiniest nod. "All right then," she whispered. "We'll give Mr. Otis a spin." The next morning, as promised, Monica placed the record on the player. The soft, gravelly voice of Otis filled the room. Monica, wearing her house slippers and an old apron, began to sway. She didn't look at Ellis, not right away. She wanted him to feel the freedom without pressure. She wanted him to just be there in it. So she moved. She stepped from left to right, hands in the air, eyes closed. She twirled once, then twice. And when she opened her eyes, Ellis was there on the threshold. Not just in his chair but standing beside it. Hands gripping the armrest like he'd just climbed out of a storm. Legs shaking, face pale. But his eyes were locked on her. "Baby," she whispered. "Don't be scared. I'm right here." He didn't fall. He didn't run. He just stood. Monica didn't run toward him, didn't panic. She just started dancing again. Slow, soft, patient, like the floor was telling a story they both knew. And Ellis took one step, then another, and then dropped slowly back into the chair. Exhausted, panting, cheeks red, but smiling. That was the first time she saw him smile. She didn't scream, didn't call anyone, didn't even clap. She just walked over, knelt in front of him, and said, "Told you silence ain't the end of your story." But Monica didn't know that the entire moment was being recorded, and that someone else in the house would see it before she had a chance to explain. Charles hadn't meant to check the cameras that morning. He only pulled up the feed because the alarm company pinged him about a low battery warning in Zone 3, living room, east wall. Basic maintenance, nothing serious. But when he tapped the video tab on his tablet and rewound 10 minutes just to check, he froze. There was Monica dancing in front of the coffee table and Ellis standing. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. He tapped the screen to rewind, then again, and again, watching it like it might disappear if he blinked too fast. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He didn't even breathe for a good 10 seconds. He tapped the intercom. "Gina, my office. Now." His assistant, barely 3 sips into her tea in the kitchen, hustled upstairs. "What's wrong?" she asked, already bracing herself for bad news. Charles spun the tablet toward her. "Watch." She did, twice. "Is this recent?" "Timestamp says it's from this morning. About 30 minutes ago." She squinted. "Where's the therapist?" "There is no therapist. That's Monica." Gina turned to him, eyebrows raised. "That's Monica?" "Yes." And Ellis just, "What?" stood up like that. He didn't answer because that was the question rattling around in his own head. Not just how Ellis stood up, but why now? Why her? He pulled up the footage from the past week. He didn't even realize how often Monica played music in that room or how many times Ellis sat nearby, always in the background, always watching. He rewound to the day before. Otis Redding again, Monica moving, dust rag in hand, her back to the camera. Ellis sat still, but his hand tapped the rhythm against the side of his wheelchair. Charles blinked. That wasn't a coincidence. He called Alma. "Did you say you recommended this woman?" Alma, now retired and living with her niece in Waterbury, answered slowly. "Yes, sir. Monica Traylor from Georgia. You said she wasn't a nurse." "No, but she's got more healing in her little finger than any doctor I ever met. She's doing things with Ellis I haven't seen in 7 years." Elma was quiet for a second, then said, "Some folks carry light with them. They don't need training. They don't need permission. They just walk in the room and something changes." Charles didn't like that answer. It sounded too much like magic, and he hated anything he couldn't explain. But when he looked at the footage again at Ellis standing on his own, no help, no prompting, it didn't feel like magic. It felt like Monica had seen something no one else had even bothered to look for. Meanwhile, Monica was in the laundry room, humming while folding towels. She had no idea she just triggered the biggest shift in that house in years. Ellis had rolled himself back to the window quietly. He didn't speak. He didn't mention the steps he took. Monica didn't either, but he watched her differently now. Not just with curiosity, but with trust. He followed her into the kitchen when she started dinner prep, rolling slowly behind her like a shadow. She didn't turn around. "You want to help me cook?" she asked. Silence, then a whisper. "Cut the carrots." She paused, frozen. Slowly, she turned. He was holding a carrot in one hand and a child-safe knife in the other. She blinked. "You just spoke to me." He looked down, almost like he didn't mean to. She walked over, gently placed her hand on his shoulder, and said, "You want to do the onions too?" He nodded. Simple, real, quiet. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. Just passed him the cutting board and said, "Be careful with your fingers, baby. They're the only ones you got." Upstairs, Charles was still glued to the monitor, watching Monica dance, watching Ellis rise, watching the moment the impossible became reality right under his nose. He tapped the screen and paused it on Ellis, standing mid-step. He didn't feel joy. Not yet. He felt something he didn't expect. Shame. Because this woman, a stranger, had reached his son in 3 weeks in a way no one else had in 7 years. And he didn't even know how. But soon he would, because later that night he decided to confront Monica. And he didn't come with questions. He came with accusations. That evening, just past 7 p.m., the house felt different. Not because of anything anyone said, but because of what Charles Prescott was planning to say. He waited in the living room, sitting rigid in the same armchair he rarely used, facing the middle of the room like it was a courtroom. He didn't ask Monica to come in. He waited until she passed through on her way to tidy the den and spoke flatly. "Monica, sit." She turned slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. He didn't look at her. She eased onto the edge of the sofa, quiet, calm, patient. Charles stayed silent for a few seconds too long. "I saw the footage from this morning," he said finally. "The camera. You and Ellis." She didn't react. "I saw him standing." Still no reaction, just a slight shift in her breathing. Charles looked at her for the first time. "You need to tell me what happened. What you did. Did you pull him up? Did you stage that?" Monica's face stayed still. Sir, was that safe? Do you realize how dangerous that could have been? What if he fell? I didn't touch him. You didn't encourage it? I danced. He watched. That's all. Charles leaned forward. You expect me to believe my son stood up for the first time in his life just because you danced? Monica looked him in the eyes, no fear, no apology. I don't expect you to believe anything, sir. But I do expect you to listen. He didn't like that answer, but he didn't cut her off. She continued, calm but steady. That boy's been surrounded by people who talk about him like he ain't in the room. Doctors, therapists, teachers, even you. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm saying they were looking at him for what he couldn't do, not what he might do. She leaned back just slightly, the only hint of emotion showing in her voice. I didn't push him. I didn't ask him to prove anything. I just showed up every day and treated him like a person, not a patient. Charles narrowed his eyes. And you think that's all it took? No. I think that's what he needed. There was a pause. He looked down at his hands, rubbed his palms slowly. Something in her words got under his skin, not because they were wrong, but because they weren't. She stood up. I'm not trying to take credit for your son's progress, but I won't sit here and pretend he didn't take those steps on his own. I was just dancing. Charles stood too slower. His voice dropped. I've spent millions on the best people money can buy, all the right programs, the latest devices. And you're telling me he just needed someone to talk to him? No. I'm saying he needed someone to see him. He didn't reply, just walked toward the liquor cart, poured himself a small glass of something expensive, and kept his back turned. Monica waited another few seconds, then turned to leave. But before she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Why music? She paused. He turned to face her again, quieter this time. Why do you always play those records? Monica gave a soft smile. Because songs don't ask anything from you. They don't demand you move. They don't get frustrated if you don't talk back. They just keep playing. And sometimes, when you're ready, your body remembers how to listen. That night, after she went to bed, Charles stayed in the living room. Didn't touch his drink. Didn't check his emails. He just sat. He pulled up the footage one more time. Ellis watching, Monica dancing. And then those steps, slow, shaky, but real. Upstairs, Ellis couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling for a long time, trying to put words to the things he was feeling. He didn't have many, just fragments. He thought about Monica's singing, the way she moved like she belonged in the house, the way she never asked him to perform but still made him feel like he could. He closed his eyes and whispered to no one in particular, I'm not scared anymore. The next morning, Charles came downstairs earlier than usual. He stepped into the kitchen and saw Monica stirring oatmeal at the stove. Ellis sat at the table with a coloring book. Good morning, Charles said. His voice rough from the weight of too many thoughts. Monica nodded. Morning, Mr. Prescott. He walked over to the table and looked at the drawing. Is that a record player? Ellis gave a small smile. Monica spoke without turning. He said he wants to learn how to use mine. Charles nodded. Maybe we should get him his own. She turned, surprised. He didn't look at her, just said, if he's going to stand, he might as well let him dance too. But even as peace began to settle, something else was coming. A deeper truth about Monica's past that would shake the house one more time. 2 days later, the footage went public. It wasn't Monica. It wasn't Charles. It wasn't even Ellis. It was Gina. She didn't mean to cause trouble. At least that's what she told herself. But after seeing the video of Ellis standing, raw and untouched, something inside her shifted. She'd followed Charles for years, watched him chase results and reputation like they were survival. She'd watched Ellis grow up without a real childhood. That night, Monica stood at the doorway of Ellis's room and watched him sleep, his legs curled, his chest rising slow and steady. She whispered, Thank you, baby, for letting me in, and she turned off the light. Sometimes the people we expect the least from are the ones who change everything. Sometimes healing doesn't come from a clinic or a manual. Sometimes it's a song, a quiet room, a woman with tired feet and an open heart, and a boy who was finally ready to stand. If the story meant something to you, share it. You never know who needs to hear it.